There is a chat feature that is available for those of you that are online, so if you could submit your questions through that feature, that would be great. And we will, for people that want to stay on, we will answer questions. We'll stay on the phone as long as needed, as long as there are questions to respond to. So with that, I'm going to jump into the agenda. And just quickly, we want to talk about some updates on the current submission just to make sure everybody's on the same page. We want to talk about the new data submission process, including proposed validations that we had recently emailed out to all of you. And then we want to spend some time talking about some technology requirements, a refresher on MHDO Rule Chapter 241, bring back to the table some timelines and next steps, and then we will end with specific questions and answers. So with that, I want to just take a minute to, before I hand the presentation off to Leanne Candora with HSRI, I'm just going to take a couple of minutes and walk through slide 3 and 4. So as a reminder, you have the option to submit your Quarter 3 2015 inpatient and outpatient hospital data through our process with our vendor database. So everything can stay as it is for the submission of your Q3 2015 data. Or you can hold that data and you can submit it in our new system. And so that is up to you and your organizations, but you have the option. Where there is no option is for the old historical data. So anything that is pre-Q3 2015 needs to be submitted vis-a-vis database. And it needs to get through the process, meaning it needs to be in a pass status by January 31st of 2016. If we do not receive the data by that date, unfortunately, we will not be able to include it in the database, and we will make note of any missing or incomplete data in the documentation that we release out to the users so that they will be aware of what might be missing. So then the next slide, just to take a minute and remind everybody, and I think we talked about this early on, I guess in the spring, when we had our introductory webinar on our new system. And we had sent out a survey where many of you had provided feedback about the current process and what could we do better in a new system. And the feedback that we received from, as I said, many of you, as well as our end data users, basically identified 4 major goals of our new submission process. And I wanted to just bullet out those goals as a reminder that what you were looking for, what many of you had indicated in the survey response, was number 1, clear reporting of status of submitted files. So understanding what has passed, what has failed, and what the compliance with the submission requirements are. Timely feedback and clear explanation of data issues. Many of you underscored this point. Decrease the amount of time needed to address errors and ensure that the data and data quality meet the needs of not just the MHDO, but the many stakeholders that are using this data, which include many hospitals in the state are accessing this data for analyses that they are doing, as well as lots of other different categories of users. So as we work through the details of the day today, I just want people to keep in mind that these are sort of the guiding principles that we've been working under as we create this new system. And I think, like anything, there'll be some bumps along the way as we roll this out. Hopefully, all of the work that we're doing in advance working with many of you on a more detailed level to work through some of the more specifics in the testing that we're going to put in place, that those things will minimize the bumps. But our goal really is to get to a better place where it's much more efficient for you all, as well as the end product being of higher quality. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leanne, and she will walk us through, I believe, the remaining slides in the deck. And again, please don't hold your questions. Send them vis-a-vis the chat function, and we will collect those and then respond to them at the end of the presentation. And again, thank you for taking the time to be part of this.
Thank you, Karen Lee. The next section of today's presentation is about the new data submission process. Many of you may have been on the previous webinar that we had held this summer or last spring. Some of this will be sort of a refresher on the new process that we're going to be undertaking in building the new hospital data warehouse portal. And so I'll be kind of walking you through the different steps over the next 15 minutes with the new data submission process. The Secure MHDO Data Warehouse Portal is a website that will be available 24/7 that will allow hospitals to submit data and validate the data through an interactive interface developed with your feedback and testing input. To reduce the burden on submitters and improve data quality, we will use a system where validation feedback can be obtained quickly, the security of sensitive information can be ensured, and a minimal amount of bandwidth and server resources are used in this process. So there's 4 steps in the process that I'm going to walk you through. The first is registration. The next is data submission. The third is the data processing and validation. And finally, the data being passed into the MHDO data warehouse. So step 1, registration. MHDO will ask each hospital to register beginning next spring, and I'll go through the dates and the timeline. This will give you access to the new hospital data submission system. First, each hospital must identify an administrative contact who will be responsible for making sure everyone else in their company is identified and registered in the system. There are a number of other system roles that hospital users can be assigned to. And again, every hospital must have an administrative contact, and that will be the first person who will be registered. There is also MHDO assigned hospital codes, and each hospital will be assigned a code to identify them for reference and to use when naming files for submission. And many of the codes may be the same as codes the hospitals are already used to using. So this slide just goes over the different system roles. As I mentioned previously, the administrative physician is required. It keeps their responsibilities are keeping facility profile and contact user information updated and assigning roles and site access and permissions to the other members within the system. The next is compliance. This is a required role. They will supervise inpatient and outpatient data submitters, and then they have the authority to resolve issues related to missing or failed data submissions. The next is outpatient data submitter. This is a required role for anybody who submits outpatient data, and inpatient data submitter is a required role for hospitals. There's also a general role where there's no set roles or responsibilities within the portal, but if they're interested in receiving relevant notifications from MHDO, it's sort of like a mailing list through the portal that they can be put on within the portal. Also part of the registration process, before I move on to step 2, is we're going to be asking hospitals to send us other lists of their departments or sub-facilities that will be used later on as I describe the validation process, and I'll give a little more information about that in a few minutes. So step 2 is data submission. Once your facility and users have registered, data will be submitted via the online MHDO web portal. Files that are submitted to the portal must be compressed and encrypted before submission. Users must be assigned either an administrator or data submitter permissions to be able to submit data through the portal. and data will be accepted either on a monthly or quarterly basis. And data must be submitted in the required file format according to the MHDO Rule Chapter 241. Files that are not in the layout will not be able to get through the new system. So step 3 is the processing and validation of those data. All hospital data submitted to the web portal will be evaluated against a set of data validations before they are accepted into the data warehouse. The validation process will produce a report that identifies the validation issues that must be resolved before data are accepted into the warehouse. And the next few slides are going to be discussing those validations. One of the goals of the new system is to improve the front-end data submission process for the data submitter. We believe better front-end validations in the long run will create efficiencies for our data submitters and a higher quality data set. We are in the process of developing over 400 data validations for the inpatient and hospital data. The current error process, along with MHDO's experience with claims data validation, is the basis for the new validation set. These new set of validations were sent out recently to all hospital data submitters. All data submissions will be evaluated against the appropriate validation set. We'll be going over the 4 types of validations, which are structural, exemption, profile, and ad hoc, in a few minutes. And again, we've sent out a draft set of validations, was for just the inpatient data at this time, and we'll be continuing to walk through some more information about validations that will help you understand the impact on you as you're submitting. The hospital data validation system will be designed to be user-friendly, allowing data submitters to resolve issues quickly and easily. All files will be validated within 24 hours with an average time of less than an hour, and you'll receive an email notification indicating whether your file has passed or has issues, currently referred to as correctable edits or rejections within the database system. The submitter can view all issues in the portal. There are some issues, such as structural issues, such as the file not containing the correct number of fields, that will require correction and resubmission of the data file to proceed. Issues that impact data quality will require hospitals to address them through correction and resubmission of the data files, or an override that may require MHDO approval, depending on the type of validation. While you are no longer able to edit your data directly through our system, our goal is to minimize the time required to upload data files, decrease the failure rate of uploads, decrease the amount of corrections that are required due to incorrect file formats and unnecessary or faulty validation algorithms, to ensure that data submitted to and accepted into the data warehouse portal accurately reflect the data from the source systems, and finally, to ensure that the data and data quality meet the needs of MHDO's numerous and various stakeholders, which include many of the hospitals themselves. So as I mentioned before, a proposed set of validation rules was emailed to all hospital data submitters on November 10th. These proposed validation rules are also available on the hospital data submitters page of the MHDO website. MHDO has also been working with a smaller group of hospital data experts and hospital data submitters to establish the data validations and thresholds. So you can be assured the rules that were sent out have been previously vetted before being shared with a wider group. We are looking for your questions and feedback by December 4th. These proposed validation rules are, again, they're in draft format. We are interested in your input, and so please feel free to ask questions either through today's webinar or through the email address provided. After the inpatient validation rules have been finalized, we will distribute the proposed outpatient validation rules. So next I will review the 4 types of data validations outlined earlier and provide a few examples of each. So the first is the structural level validation. Structural level validation issues occur when a file fails to meet the required file format and typically prevents the use or full validation of the data. The only way to resolve a structural level failure is to correct the file format and resubmit the file with the next version number, file name, if applicable, request an override for MHDO. As an example, so on this page are two structural level examples. The first, file name problem, occurs when a file is not properly named according to the conventions to be specified. The only way to resolve this issue is to correct the file name and resubmit. The second example, unexpected volume, determines if the current submissions volume falls within plus or minus 15% of the rolling historical average of records submitted over the prior 12 months. So if you've been a data submitter to MHDO for at least the past year, we're coming up with a rolling average that we're going to compare your recent month or quarterly submission to. This validation is only performed when historical volume is consistently greater than 100 records. In this case, submitters can correct and resubmit data if the unexpected volume is an error, or they will have the option to request an override by supplying an explanation for the unexpected volume. The override will then be approved or rejected by MHDO. So what we're trying to do before the data even come into our system is to make sure that the file is of expected size, that you didn't accidentally submit a file for your hospital that had only 10% of the records that you normally submit. So it's a way to better understand and control the data that are coming into the system and alert submitters to potential errors before on our processing, and then not have to follow up with facilities months afterwards to let them know there was an error in the volume of their submission. So the next validation type is exemption level. For example, exemption level issues, a submitter may request an exemption to a threshold by providing an explanation or justification to the MHDO. If authorized, the explanation will be maintained in the system as metadata and made available to the MHDO data users. Exemptions from thresholds are typically limited to a set period of time, but exemptions can be made permanent at MHDO's discretion. Now, the next slide will give a few examples of exemption level issues. So the first example, valid patient sex code, is evaluating whether all instances of IP 2004 are not blank and on a list of valid patient codes. So, for example, the list of validation codes is M equals male, F equals female, U equals unknown. So these are the data we're expecting in that field. If there is another code in this field that is not M, F, or U, we will not, exemption level validation error will be shown on your data. The second, valid principal procedure code, is evaluating whether 99.5% of non-blank fields are on a list of valid ICD-10 PCS procedure codes. So again, this is making sure that if you have a procedure code in this field, that it's actually a valid procedure code. The next type of issue is called profile level. A submitter may override profile level validation issues without MHDO approval by providing an explanation or justification. The explanation will be maintained in the system as metadata and made available to MHDO data users. Once an override is in place, it will be applied automatically to all future submissions made until the end of the calendar year. Profile level validations apply to elements that can vary by nature of a submitter's business. So here are a few examples of profile level validation. So the first is admission hour populated. So we expect that admission hour will be populated for 99.5% of the submissions. So that means a valid entry in the field is not blank. And then the next is principal procedure code populated. Again, this is checking for non-blank fields. As you remember in an earlier validation, we are checking to make sure that when it is populated, that's a valid code. This one is making sure that this field is actually populated 99.5% of the time. And again, if this gets issued as a validation issue within the system, you will have the opportunity to provide a reason why you're not able to fill one of these fields 99.5% of the time, and this information is then stored in the system. The last type of validation issues is called an ad hoc level. A submitter may override ad hoc level issues without MHDO approval by providing an explanation or justification. The difference between ad hoc level and a profile level validation is that once you set an override on a profile level, you will not see that validation issue come up again for another calendar year. So that override is set for a year. Ad hoc level validations, they will come up every month or quarter that the data are submitted that the validation continues to be an issue. The explanation of the override will be maintained in the system as metadata made available to MHDO and data users. Once an override is in place, it will only apply to the current submission. Ad hoc level validations are those that submitters may override during the data submission process, but that MHDO does not allow to be set permanently. And here are a couple examples. So the first is patient sex not unknown. A valid entry as patient sex code is something other than an unknown. And then the next one is diagnosis code invalid for patient sex code. So a valid entry means that the diagnosis is appropriate for a patient sex code. So what we have within the system for this validation is a cross-check of diagnosis codes with patient sex and to make sure that they're actually valid codes for that sex. Once a file has been submitted and processed, always within 24 hours, but typically within less than an hour, and validated, the submitter will be notified via email as to the file status, which could include pass with no issues or fail with a number of issues found. The user will then log into the MHDO Data Warehouse portal to view details of the validation issues report. Once a user logs in, they can view any issues in the validation issue section of the portal. Here you'll see a list of outstanding issues for all your data submissions. If corrections are required, they must be done in the hospital's own system and then resubmitted. If corrections are not possible, users can override an issue by providing an explanation that may or may not need MHDO approval depending on the issue type. So to remind you again, the structural issues are the only ones that will keep your data from being validated within the system. Most of the structural issues are things that allow us to not even be able to process or understand the data that are in the file. There are a few structural issues, such as the historical volume validation, that you may be prompted to provide an explanation on, and then you can proceed through the validation system. The rest of the validations are assessment of the data within the files, and we provide you feedback based on that assessment. Sometimes you can just provide a reason for why the data aren't meeting the standard or threshold that's been set, but there are some things that will require resubmission on the part of the hospital. This is usually when there's errors in the file, such as codes that are not on required code lists, fields that must always be populated that aren't populated appropriately. And again, the draft validation list that we have sent out starts to detail what these lists of validations are, and we want to make sure that both the hospitals and any of their contractors who may be setting up the files understand the standards by which their file will be judged in advance. So as I mentioned previously, there is an annual override reset, and that all exemption level and profile level overrides will automatically expire at the end of each calendar year. One of the reasons that we do that within the system is sometimes that there's an override set that now the hospital will be able to meet the standard that's been set up to override. So we just want to reassess that and to re-baseline every year the data that are coming in to understand the quality and the population of fields. Submissions that occur after the year will be evaluated against all validation rules, and new profile and exemption level overrides will have to be requested as needed. So now I'm just going to go through a few tips for reducing resubmissions. Our goal is to keep resubmissions to a minimum. In order to do so, we have the following tips. Ensure that files are being prepared to meet Chapter 241 requirements to avoid structural failures. Make sure technical vendors have a copy of the validation so they understand what would cause a file to fail. Encourage those preparing the data to test that required fields are populated correctly. So in our email that we sent with the validations, we also had some questions for hospitals related to ICD-10. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services announced over the summer that an ICD-10 CM grace period for the first year. Officials stated that for 12 months after ICD-10 implementation, Medicare review contractors will not deny physician or other practitioner claims billed under the Part B physician fee schedule through either automated medical review or complex medical record review based solely on the specificity of the ICD-10 diagnosis codes, as long as the physician or practitioner code use the code from the right family. However, a valid ICD-10 code will be required on all claims starting October 1st, 2015. As part of the November 10th email, we asked you to respond to the 2 questions listed here by November 20th, which is this Friday. Your responses to these questions will help us decide how to best validate ICD-10 fields. The 2 options currently being considered are that we, 1, validate the full specificity and allow submitters to override the issue by providing a reason or justification, or 2, validate the family only until the grace period defined by CMS expires. So we really appreciate your input, and please send Kate Mullins at the address on the screen your feedback November 20th. Finally, step 4, data pass to MHDO data warehouse. Once all validation issues have been addressed through a resubmission or resolved through overrides, data will be passed and enter into the MHDO data warehouse. Additional transformations or calculations are performed by MHDO, and data are then released by MHDO to approved data users. We have heard that from data submitters that it is critical that the new system have clear reporting of the status of submitted files, processing, failed or passed, and compliance with submission requirements. In the new system, users will have the ability to view a complete summary of their submission history and the status of each file. Users can view detailed validation results, resubmit or cancel files from the submission history. Files will be moved to the data warehouse and released to data users only after they have reached pass status. So the next section, I'm just going to go through some of the technology requirements for the new data submission system. The first is just some browser and browser settings that will optimize your experience. On the left is a list of currently supported browsers. And then on the right is the minimum required browser settings. And again, we'll continue to put this information in front of potential submitters just so they have this once they start getting ready to move to the new system. The MHDO Data Warehouse portal will send email notifications regarding registration, file submissions, and other information to its users. In preparation for the new system, please ask your company to whitelist or approve the MHDO Data Warehouse portal email address, which is listed on the screen, and their spam filters. And this will help us ensure that you'll be getting all of the notifications from the new Data Warehouse portal. To ensure the security of personally identifiable information and personal health information and to reduce file transmission times, MHDO will require submitters to compress and encrypt all files before uploading. Compression and encryption can be accomplished by using a number of industry standard tools such as WinZip or 7-Zip, many of which may already be in use at your workplace. And once it comes time to start the new portal data submission, we'll give more information on the requirements around this. So next, in addition to the file level encryption, hospitals will submit via the data warehouse portal over an HTTPS connection, which uses the Secure Sockets Layer SSL protocol. Once data are submitted, they are transferred to an ORC Secure Data Enclave. So this is just a little more information for data submitters to understand the security behind their data submissions and to understand that we really look to make the utmost protections available to the data that are being transmitted and stored within the environment where the data warehouse sits. So that finishes the data submission portal section of the webinar. The next we're going to move into the MHDO Rule Chapter 241, and we're going to review some of the basics of MHDO Rule Chapter 241, the proposed changes, and some tips and helpful hints. Again, we want to reiterate that the new system will require that your file layout comply with MHDO Rule Chapter 241. A copy of the current Rule Chapter 241 and the proposed Rule Chapter 241, which was recently approved by the MHDO Board, is in its final review stage but can be found on MHDO Statutes and Rules webpage listed here. Rule Chapter 241 is structured as follows. Section 1 provides the overview with definitions, data set filing descriptions, submission requirements, and standards for data. Section 2 includes the various appendices, which Appendix A is the source codes and references. Appendix B1 includes the inpatient data submission specifications. B2 is the inpatient data record mapping to national standards. Appendix C includes the outpatient data submission specifications. And finally, Appendix C2 includes the outpatient data record mapping and national standards. The proposed Rule Chapter 241, which was recently approved by the MHDO Board and is in its final review stage, includes the following changes to general submission requirements. References to designee or designee systems are no longer specific to one designee or system. Obsolete names and references have been updated. The term text replaces alphanumeric. Signed values would be reported differently. The resubmission of historical data older than 1 year can be approved by MHDO, and clarification of appropriate timely provider response to notification of data. So in the appendices, the following changes have been made. Source document information has been updated. Version numbers eliminated and additional instructions have been provided. References to obsolete standards have been removed. Data elements names have been updated. The data element type alphanumeric now is identified as text. Numbers and dates are reassigned to text. Data element mappings have been updated, and a separate mapping to the 837 institutional and the 837 professional and outpatient data indicate the mapping differences. So now I'm going to go through some tips and helpful hints for the Chapter 241 updates. Providers must use the MHDO assigned 6-digit provider codes for all inpatient and outpatient data submissions. These will be used in the file names and file headers. Default values or blanks will not be accepted for MHDO assigned or provider assigned identifiers. We will require that these will always be filled in. Appendix A of Chapter 241 provides references to the accepted source codes, and this will be important for the new system. And for particular fields, there should only be a ICD-9 or ICD-10 code. There are separate fields for each. Each hospital using the location of service field must provide a crosswalk of its codes to the MHDO. And as I mentioned during the earlier portion of the presentation about registration, we will be asking hospitals to be sending in a crosswalk of their codes that they use for this location of service field during the registration process, so we can ensure that once you're ready to start submitting data, that we have this list of codes ready to be validated against. So finally, timeline and next steps. When is this all happening? This timeline will look very familiar to those of you who have been tracking the work of the transition to the new hospital system. As the first task on the timeline, the final submissions to the current system, which includes Q3 2015, which again is optional, and all outstanding historical data, which is defined as pre-quarter 3 2015. That must be submitted through DataBay by January 31st, 2016. That system will shut down to submissions after that point in time, and any data, including the Q3 2015, will need to be submitted through the new system. And the timeline for the new system is the testing period will open in April, the fourth month, April 1st, 2016, and we'll have the portal open for 1 month for testing. This will really be a time for hospitals to test out the new system, to send their data in through the system, to see how the validations are working, to see how their data validate against the new system data, the new data system, and to provide feedback for improvements that we can make before the go-live date. So this is really serving multiple purposes. It's to get hospitals familiar with the new system, to provide them opportunity to understand the sort of validation feedback they'll be getting from their files, and to provide us feedback on how the system is working for the hospitals. So we really look forward to this time working with you to make sure that by the time we reach the go-live date in July, that we have a system that is going to be efficient and effective for what we're trying to accomplish. So as you will see, the go-live date is July 11th of 2016, and that's when we'll be requiring that hospitals submit their Q3 if they haven't already, and then their Q4 2015 and Q1 2016 data. Be asking for you to almost catch up on some of the data submissions while we've had this holding period between the closing of the database system until the opening of the new MHDO portal. All right, now we will review and answer any questions that have come through. So if you haven't got your question out yet, now is the time. I'm going to start looking for the questions.
I believe the only question that's come in so far is asking whether the new Chapter 241 is available on the MHDO website.
Yes, it is available, and we can make sure that that link is sent out if people are having a hard time finding it, but it's available on the rules page.
It is. If you go to our website, there's a link on the left that is statute and rules. And if you click on that link, it will take you to a list of all of them. You will find the new Chapter 241, where it is 241. And under the proposed changes for that rule, we have also left the last draft containing all of the markups with the underlining for new language and the strike-throughs for deleted language, so that you will be able to find the changes or identify the changes more easily.
And then we've had a couple other questions coming in about the slides being available. This session is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and the recording will be posted on the MHDO website. They will probably send out, it'll be about a week because we have to close caption the webinar, so we will probably send a notification out to hospitals once it is posted. We have another question come in about the historical volume validation. If it's believed that a facility's volume is inaccurate for the previous year, is there a way to update that to ensure the validation will work? I think that's a great question, and one that we'll probably take back and get a better understanding of. and to see how we might be able to implement that a little differently. Will we only receive an edit for not having an ICD-10 PCS code for inpatient? I don't know if I understand that.
I didn't catch the question.
The question is, will we only receive an edit for not having an ICD-10 PCS code for inpatient?
If that is regarding the fact that ICD-10 PCS only strictly applies to inpatient claims, then essentially we are looking into that right now. I know that it is not mandatory for outpatient, so we are looking into properly validating that so that you will not be expected to put in ICD-10 PCS into outpatient billing.
Another question about being sent the list of validations. Yes, these were distributed. They're available on the MHGO website. We're looking forward to the feedback, and then we'll send out a revised set with the outpatient validations in there as well. And the reason that we started with the inpatient, we thought that any feedback related to those could also be applied to the outpatient, that we just send those back out at the same time.
For those unfamiliar with the site, again, if you go to the navigation bar, way at the bottom, there's a hospital data submitters link. If you click on there, you will get to the links of the validation rules that Leanne just referred to.
I also received a question about historical data deadlines and asking if the system is being open until January, if that's their new historical deadline. I think we can probably follow up with that group. Another was about the testing period. Again, we had a 1-month period in April being slated for the testing. We'll see how testing goes within that 1 month. Really, the reason why it's a set end date is that we really are looking for feedback or impressions based on that testing period, but we'll continue to work with you to make sure that window is working. But we do feel that's a pretty hard deadline, and that we do need you to test during that period. Does every hospital need to register multiple times if they have different MHDO IDs? I believe the answer to that is no. We set up a system that a hospital will register, and we can manage the IDs within that, but we will follow up on that question. When will a clean version of the specifications be posted? The specifications, I don't know, would that be Chapter 241?
Correct.
Okay. So when will a clean version, do we know yet?
I think it is.
The Secretary of State has the rule now, and so the final isn't exactly done yet. But as soon as we get that back from the Secretary of State, that will be posted.
Contact person for technical issues. At this point, if you do have some technical questions about anything that I've gone over today, Kate Mullins, the email address that we had shared before, katemullins@hsri.org, she can be contacted. There is a help desk for the portal that will be in place, and that is the NORC. It's at our partner NORC at the University of Chicago. That information will start being made available once we move to system go live and during the testing period, and so there will be a whole set of phone numbers and email addresses and contact forms when you're actually in the portal that can be used for any technical portal issues. But up until that point, feel free to contact HSRI or MHDO if you have technical questions leading up to this process. Another couple questions about 241 draft or final. I think we can, we already addressed those. Can we submit more than one file during the testing period? Absolutely. You can submit as many as you like. I don't want to say it. I'm sure my team members are cringing. As many are deemed appropriate to get you through the testing period. All right, so I think I've gone through the questions that I've seen. If there are more questions, again,
Thank you.
we've given you some contact information. We really appreciate if you're able to provide some feedback on some of the questions that we've had for you and the validation issues. But we're here to work with you through this transition period. Us at HSRI, I know we're very excited to go through this process with you and build this new system that will address some of the things with the process and the eventual hospitalization files for the data users. Certainly, anything else that you want to add?
Just quickly, and I think there might be somebody who may be multitasking, and if you are, could you just mute your phone? So, no, I think just a quick reminder that, as Leanne said, we are absolutely ready and available to talk to you and or your technical team or vendors with any specific questions you have regarding Rule Chapter 241 as well as the proposed validations. Please take us up on this offer. Time is marching on, and before we know it, April will be here, and we want to make sure that we have helped prepare you as best we can as we approach the new year. We really do want your feedback on these proposed validations. It can be somewhat overwhelming, I think, looking at the hundreds of validations. So again, we're happy to talk through any of that with you. But we are looking for your feedback by, I believe the date was December 4th. And then also specific to the ICD-10 question, again, looking for feedback on that by, I think we said the 20th. So I hope what this is showing you is we are interested in working with you as we build out this new system. And that hasn't changed from when we originally launched the new strategy with you earlier this year. So again, don't forget, Q3, you have an option. You can submit it through Database or you can hold it. For your historical files, and again, that's pre-Q3 2015, you've got to get those into us before we end the agreement or arrangement with Database, which is January 31st.
There's been a couple more questions.
I think we've had a few more questions since I've laid that all out, so Leanne, hit us with them.
A question came in, are you using a true 5010 format? And the answer is no, we are using Chapter 241, so whatever the specifications are in there, that's what you use. When is Quarter 3 2015 data due if requested in 2016? If you're holding that submission, that is due in July when the portal is open. I don't think we've set a complete end date for that yet, but it should be submitted starting in July 11th, 2016. There's a question, how many people can be in the data at one time? I'm not sure what that question means. It may mean the portal. I'll answer that as if the question is about the portal. There's multiple people from a hospital that can be registered in the portal and in there at the same time. And another question about the copies of the slides, they will be posted on the MHDO website. Should we do a last call?
So I think the lines are open because we have heard some other conversations going on. So if people have, I know it's hard because there are so many people on the phone, but if there are specific questions, we've got time. If people want to use the phone.
So there was another question that came in about multiple people being logged in. If you have a login for your hospital, multiple people can be logged in at the same time.
Okay. Are there any questions that anybody wants to raise or any issues that anybody wants to put on the table? And Leanne, one last time, are there any more questions that have come through? Okay, well I think then if there are no more questions, we'll go ahead and end this webinar. And again, you've got my contact information, Kate Mullen's contact information. Please don't hesitate to reach out, and thanks everybody.